All right, we're going to look at the most famous judge in the book of Judges today, none other than Samson. Everyone say Samson.
Samson.
And he was an Israelite whom God gave supernatural strength to so that he could defeat the Philistines who were oppressing Israel. And Samson, this is Revelation number 1, was not Popeye. All right, his strength did not come from spinach. His strength came from somewhere else, and we will see where shortly. Samson's story takes place over several chapters, and so I won't read all of those chapters to you. What I'll do instead is try and extract some of the key lessons from it. But I wonder what image was in your mind as I mentioned Samson, because whether you take much note of it or not, when we mention these various Bible characters, you do probably have an image in your mind. It may not be a clear image, but I suspect if I mention Abraham, he doesn't look young and he has a beard in your mind. And Samson, what does he look like? Is he big or is he small? Does he have big muscles or does he look normal? Are his muscles as big as mine? That's the question. Now, Polly thinks they are bigger. I doubt that very much. But here's the thing. It's important that we realize that the source of Samson's strength was not his muscles. And we see this clearly in Judges chapter 14, verses 5 to 6. It says, as Samson and his parents were going down to Timnah, a young lion suddenly attacked Samson near the vineyards of Timnah. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. He did it as easily as if it were a young goat. Wow. So where did his strength come from? It says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. You see, if Samson had big muscles, maybe he did, I don't know. We don't know what he looked like. But if it was all his big muscles, we wouldn't be saying he was given supernatural strength. All right, but it was supernatural. And so maybe he looked more normal than we might think. Now, it was because the Spirit of God came upon him. Again, in Judges 14, verse 19, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men. Again, it's the Spirit of God coming upon him that enabled him to do it. And then again in Judges 15:14, it says, as Samson arrived in Lehi, the Philistines came shouting in triumph. But the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson, and he snapped the ropes on his arms as if they were burnt strands of flax, and they fell from his wrists. And so this reminds us of a very important life lesson when it comes to walking with God. God is the source of our strength. All right? Somebody was just reading, it was their phone, I think, reading it out loud. So, God is the source of our strength. In Philippians 4:12 to 13, Paul wrote, I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little, for I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. And yes, it may not be physical strength like Samson, but God strengthens us to victoriously face whatever it is we are facing. And this is a key lesson from the story of Samson. When you feel weak, know that God is strong, and his strength is made perfect in your weakness. All right? And if you've never felt weakness, how can you know what it is to need God's strength? God is our strength. In Exodus 15, verse 2, it says, the Lord is my strength and my song. He has given me victory. And then in Psalm 68:35, God is awesome in his sanctuary. The God of Israel gives power and strength. Everyone say strength. To his people. And he says, praise be to God, which is a understandable thing, because when we experience God's strength, it is encouraging, because we realize that, you know what, it's not about my human effort, it's not about my perfection, it's not about my perfect understanding of anything, it's about God who strengthens me. And we need his strength to live this life victoriously. We can't do it in our own strength. In your own strength, you will fail 10 times out of 10 as you try to resist the devil and to walk in the Spirit. But with God's strength, you can be victorious. And so let us make sure in this year and always, we lean on God's strength. And you see, this is why Jesus told us to pray. He said, look, when you pray, say, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. What is that? It is God's strength enabling you to overcome the devil's temptations. And here's the thing. Jesus told us to pray that prayer in Matthew's version. He said, give us this day. Everyone say this day. Our daily bread. Say this day. Now notice, it's this day. It's today. In other words, we need to pray every day. He didn't say, give me for the whole year my yearly bread. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. But in that particular instance in Matthew's gospel, he says, give us this day our daily bread. And so when it goes on to say, deliver us from the evil one, that is something we are to be praying every day. And look, here's the thing. The devil wants you to feel comfortable. And we'll get onto that in a moment. I don't want to run ahead of this message. But you see, the devil wants you to feel victorious enough so that you no longer feel the need to pray, deliver us from the evil one. And you see, comfort is deceptive. And that was the problem in Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3. He said, look, you think you're rich, you're looked after, you're comfortable, but you don't realize that you're wretched, poor, blind, and naked spiritually. And you see, the devil wants us to feel comfortable. But look, you appreciate central heating when it's cold. And believe you me, it's cold at the moment. Cold. And you appreciate your need for heat when it's cold. But when you're comfortable in the heat, you don't realize how cold it is. And sometimes through comfort in life, we can think we are doing better than we actually are in God's sight. But we need to remember that God is our strength. And the only way we can fulfill his plan for us is by his strength. And it has to be supernatural strength. Now, when Samson got married, we begin to observe another key lesson in his story. The first lesson I mentioned was that God is the source of our strength. But the next is this. We need to make sure we don't keep on repeating the same mistakes in our lives over and over again. And it's actually quite comical, Samson's story, and we can easily laugh at him. But then we have to stop and say, now hold on a minute. Am I doing stuff in my life again and again and again that is spiritually harmful to me? Am I learning from my mistakes, or am I repeating them? And we observe in Judges 14, what had happened is that when Samson got married at his wedding party, he said to some of the Philistines, he said, look, I've got a riddle. If you can solve it, then I will give you 30 garments, 30 linen robes, etc. And he said to them, that's what I'll give you if you can solve my riddle. But if you can't, then you have to give that to me. And the Philistines told his wife to find out the riddle. And they threatened her, saying, look, tell us the riddle, or we will burn your father's house to the ground with you in it. And so it continues in Judges 14:16. It says, so Samson's wife came to him in tears and said, you don't love me, you hate me. You have given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer, because his wife was a Philistine. I haven't even given the answer to my father or mother, he replied. Why should I tell you? So she cried whenever she was with him and kept it up for the rest of the celebration. At last, on the seventh day, he told her the answer because she was tormenting him with her nagging. Then she explained the riddle to the young men. And so Samson should have learned from this episode. He should have learned that he did not have a high tolerance for nagging. Everyone say nagging. Say it again. It's very important that you know what you do not have a high tolerance for. And he therefore should have also learned that he should be cautious about sharing his secrets with others. Be careful of discomfort with silence. You know, you talk when you have something to say, but sometimes you talk to fill silence. The former can be okay, the latter is not so good. I'm not saying you should never talk to fill silence, but if you feel you have to talk to fill silence, that is a vulnerability. And the book of Proverbs tells us that in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. The more you talk, the more risk there is of you saying something you shouldn't say. The more risk there is of you talking nonsense. Talk to talk. Don't talk just because you are uncomfortable with silence. Have self-control over your words. The book of James tells us that the tongue is an unruly evil, and that we've tamed creatures, but we haven't tamed the tongue. You must master your tongue. You have to have self-control over your speech, because otherwise you will end up telling people things you shouldn't tell them. Everyone say, I don't need to share that information. Have control over your speech. It's weird, the tongue. It's like, you notice, people have problems controlling their appetite. It's like the tongue just needs satisfying. It's like the difference between eating because you are hungry and eating because you are bored. All right? And that's a key difference. Some people, they put something in their mouth because they're bored, not because they need it. And in the same way, some people talk because they feel they have to, instead of them actually needing to say something. Now Samson, because of the nagging, he told the riddle to her, and then she explained the riddle to the young men. Now, he should have learned from that, but later on in Samson's life, we read the following in Judges 16, 4-12, it says, sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong. Now notice, the devil has learned Samson's weakness. And the devil observes you to find out your weaknesses so he can set you up. And so these Philistines, they say to Delilah, whom Samson loved, entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely. Samson replied, if I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that have not yet been dried, I would become as weak as anyone else. So the Philistine rulers brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with them. Now, he really should be getting a hint at this point that something's not quite right. But anyway, it continues. She had hidden some men in one of the inner rooms of her house, and she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson snapped the bowstrings as a piece of string snaps when it is burned by a fire. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Afterward, Delilah said to him, you've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now please tell me how you can be tied up securely. Samson replied, if I were tied up with brand new ropes that had never been used, I would become as weak as anyone else. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him up with them. The men were hiding in the inner room as before, and again Delilah cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But again Samson snapped the ropes from his arms as if they were thread. Now you would think that Samson by now would be catching wind of the fact that maybe he shouldn't be telling Delilah anything. I mean, clearly she's proving herself not worthy of the truth. All right? But yet this continues. And again, this is almost comical. We would be laughing at this if this were a film. This is pure stupidness, we would think. But hold on a minute. Do we do things in our life again and again that are not good for us, and we keep on doing them? You see, here's the thing. Perspective is a wonderful thing. It's easy to observe from the outside, but when you're in the situation, it's not so obvious. Why? Well, in this case, love is blind. And clearly, Samson had unmet needs, which is what caused him to stay in what is clearly a toxic situation. You see, nothing is illogical. You are not illogical. Even things that appear illogical, that you think you do for no good reason, there is a reason. And when you figure out the reason, then you're empowered to stop doing it. But everything you do that you don't want to do, there is an underlying reason for it. It might be something you are trying to escape. It might be something you are seeking, whether comfort or something else. And here's the thing, Samson was weird. By that I mean he was different than other people. And when you are different to other people, you need a safe place where you feel comfortable. And that's what he found in Delilah. And so he stayed in this situation that was bad for him because it fulfilled a need that he had in his soul. And this is why you've got to be a student of what's going on within you. Ask yourself, why am I doing X, Y, and Z? And if you are procrastinating about doing something that you need to do, you have to ask yourself, now hold on a minute, why am I procrastinating? What is it that I am fearful of? What is it that I don't want to experience that's causing me not to do what I know I need to do? And in the same way, if you're in a situation that is bad, you need to find a way of asking yourself, hold on a minute, why am I staying in this situation that I know is bad for me? It's like comfort eating. People are seeking comfort and so they keep eating. But hold on, you need to get a grip. You need to figure out, no, hold on, what is it that I really want and need? And deal with that. And so Samson now, he stayed in this ridiculous situation because there's something that he needed that he found in Delilah. Now it continues in verse 13. Delilah said, "You've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now tell me how you can be tied up securely." Now please understand, why did Delilah do this? It's because they offered her money. People are motivated by self-interest, and that includes in their relationship with you. There are people in your life that are in your life because of what you can give them. And anyhow that changes, they are gone. And you've heard me say before, people like you because of their perception of you, not necessarily because of who you actually are. And anyhow you do something that alters that perception, they're gone. But don't be discouraged when that happens. Rejoice. Be glad, because you get to see who's who in your life. And that's a very important thing. And Delilah, she was motivated by self-interest. Everybody wants something. And this is also wise because in your dealings with people in general, you need to have something to offer. Because otherwise you're perceived as of no value to them. And so you need to also understand that in life you need to have something to offer. You need to be valuable in some way. And that's why those of you in school, you study. You're learning something that will give you value, so that people want you in employment. But that's also a truth that transcends that. It's about life in general. You have value, unfortunately, in many cases, based on what you can offer. And so wisdom says, you know what, I need to make sure I have something to offer, because that's the reality of life. Life isn't fair. It can be quite brutal. People will not simply love you because you're a human being and in the image of God. You will be valued because you have something of value to offer. And so you need to know that. Now, Delilah had something to offer the Philistines, and they had something to offer her, which is why she did what she did. Why do you do what you do, and why do people in your life do what they do? It's because there is something in it for them. And it doesn't mean you despise those people. You just need to know that that is the case, so you have wisdom, so you don't give them more of yourself than you should. Locate people in your life. Know who is there and for what reason they are there, so that you do not entrust your heart to them foolishly. Instead, entrust your heart ultimately to God and to those who stay with you in bad times when you have nothing to offer. Those are the gems. And sometimes those will not be the people who you might think are the most spiritual people or the most biblically literate people. Some people are just real people. Those are the people that actually have true value in your life. And you need to identify them and honor them and respect them, learn from them, and embrace them in your life, because those are trustworthy people. Now, even Jesus was forsaken by his disciples. Why? Why did Peter deny Christ? It wasn't simply out of being a coward. Remember, when they came to arrest Jesus, it was Peter who took his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. Peter was ready to fight. He was ready to die. What happened is when Jesus got arrested, his perspective of who Jesus was shattered. Because he was expecting Jesus to be this Messiah who would deliver Israel. And here now Jesus is getting arrested and is going to be put to death. And so now his view of Jesus, his expectations of Jesus was shattered. And that's what caused him in that confusion to deny Christ. And that's why people would deny you, as I've said, when their perspective of you is shattered. And what's interesting is this. If it was the woman that were amongst Jesus' disciples that were with him, they would never have forsaken him. It's a weird thing. The men, they did. But if that were Mary and, the others, they would never have done that. But the men did, unfortunately. But why? Because he was no longer what they thought he was, which meant his value to them was reduced, which means, well, they don't need to stick around. And sadly, when your value is reduced in people's eyes, many will not stick around but rejoice. That is a good thing, that is a powerful thing, and it's a transforming thing, because now, thank God, you know who's who in your life. And you will still be kind to those people who forsook you. You will still even help them when necessary, but you won't be a fool and give your heart to them. Amen? Now Samson, it continues. Verse 13. Delilah said, "You've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now tell me how you can be tied up securely." Samson replied, "If you were to weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on your loom and tighten it with the loom shuttle, I would become as weak as anyone else." So while he slept, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric. Then she tightened it with the loom shuttle. Again she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But Samson woke up, pulled back the loom shuttle, and yanked his hair away from the loom and the fabric. Then Delilah pouted. Everyone say pouted. Oh no, that's a powerful move. "How can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you so strong." She tormented her with her nagging. Everyone say nagging. So we see that word again. Day after day until he was sick to death of it. Finally, Samson shared his secret with her. "My hair has never been cut," he confessed, "for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else." Now, a Nazirite was someone, they took a special vow to God, dedication to him, and it included not cutting their hair, it included not partaking of the fruit of the vine, grapes, wine, and it was a vow of special dedication, and that was what Samson's parents were ordered to do. He never cut his hair. And so it continues in verse 18, Delilah realized he had finally told her the truth. So she sent for the Philistine rulers. "Come back one more time," she said, "for he has finally told me his secret." So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head on her lap, and then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. In this way she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." When he woke up, he thought, "I will do as before and shake myself free." But he did not realize the Lord had left him. Now that's a dangerous place to be. This is why you never take the presence of God for granted. He didn't realize the Lord had left him. In other words, he felt no different. But he had got his hair cut off, which was part of the agreement, part of the vow. So it says, so the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. So notice, Samson suffered greatly because he refused to learn from his mistake, because he refused to recognize that the situation was not good for him. And maybe he thought he was stronger than he really was. Oh, well, I can handle it. I can handle it. But unfortunately for him, he suffered greatly as a consequence of his foolishness. The book of Proverbs tells us in Proverbs 26:11, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness." You've heard me say a few times, I shared a video with you some time ago of that sheep that was in a ditch, and the shepherds labored to bring that sheep out of the ditch. And literally, as soon as it came out of the ditch, it ran with its might and jumped into another ditch. Foolishness. But we've done it many times ourselves. However, Samson's story does not end there. In the very next verse of Judges 16, in verse 22, it says, "But before long, his hair began to grow back." Everyone say, his hair began to grow back. God is a restorer. And despite Samson's folly, God had not finished with Samson. Everyone say, there is grace.
There is grace.
Now one day, 3,000 of the Philistines had gathered in their temple, and they brought out Samson to entertain them. And in verse 28 of chapter 16 it reads, "Then Samson prayed to the Lord." And it's important that we realize that even when we've messed up, we can pray to the Lord. And it says, "Sovereign Lord, remember me again. Oh God, please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my 2 eyes." Then Samson put his hands on the 2 center pillars that held up the temple. Pushing against them with both hands, he prayed, "Let me die with the Philistines." And the temple crashed down on the Philistine rulers and all the people. So he killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. And so this was an impressive last act of Samson against the Philistines. God is a restorer, and despite our failings, he restores us. In 1 John 1 verse 9 we read, "If we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all wickedness." Now the final lesson I wish to point out is this: God knows what he is doing, even when we do not. And when Samson came of age to marry, we read in Judges 14, verses 1 to 4, it says, "One day when Samson was in Timnah, one of the Philistine women caught his eye. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, 'A young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Get her for me.'" So this is a little bit superficial, bless him, It doesn't say he got to know her or anything like that. He liked the way she looked, and from that he made a very important life decision. I want to marry her. His father and mother objected. Isn't there even one woman in our tribe or among all the Israelites you could marry? They asked. Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find the wife? But Samson told his father, get her for me, she looks good to me. His father and mother did not realize the Lord was at work in this, creating an opportunity to work against the Philistines who ruled over Israel at that time. So his parents would have been disappointed. Everyone say disappointed. They would have been disappointed with Samson's choice. God had told the Israelites not to intermarry with the surrounding nations. And I suppose they had done their best to bring up Samson in the way of the Lord. And there he was now making this very disappointing decision. But his parents did not realize that God was at work through this. God was going to use this as an opportunity to create tension between Samson and the Philistines, so that Samson would be angry at the Philistines and attack them. That's what God was doing here. And God is able to do certain things. You see, here's what it is. Certain things won't be activated in your life until you are put in a situation that drives you to activate them. And sometimes it is obstacles, it is even disappointments that activate God's call on your life. And that's what happened with Samson. It's because of what the Philistines did to him and the way that they, found out from his wife the meaning of the riddle. That's what angered Samson and caused him to attack the Philistines. And then when the Philistines killed his wife and her father, that angered him further. And this instigated the whole setup, basically, of Samson having strife with the Philistines. But the point I want to make is that they did not realize, his parents did not realize, that this disappointment was actually of God. And sometimes in life, look, you can face disappointments and be totally unaware that actually this is of the Lord, whether you understand it or not. And sometimes it's not until later that you will understand what the Lord was doing and why he allowed that disappointment or disappointments to happen. And in the time, you can't always understand it. But in Romans chapter 11, verse 33, Paul said, "Oh, how great are God's riches and wisdom and knowledge. How impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways." Faith is not only believing when we can't see, it is trusting when we can't understand. And that's where faith is made mature. When we don't understand what's going on, where we may be quite confused about what's going on, but we trust in God anyway, knowing that he knows best. And in Romans 8:28 it says, "And we know," everyone say, "we know," "that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." And so we have confidence that no matter what happens in our lives, God is working for our good. And this is something we know. Everyone say no. This is not a debatable matter. This is not something we negotiate or compromise about. This is something we know. This is a certainty, in other words, that in everything God works for our good. And so we live life in a relatively relaxed manner, like Jesus, who slept on the boat in the middle of the storm. And his disciples panicked, and Jesus had said to them, "Let's go to the other side of this lake." And the storm arose, and the disciples were panicking. They thought they were going to die, but Jesus was asleep. And when they woke him up, he said to them in Mark's gospel, it reads a bit differently in Matthew, but in Mark's gospel he says, "Where is your faith?" Or "Why is it you have no faith?" Either of those. But in Mark's gospel, it's an important gospel to read, because Mark's gospel, Jesus is presented much more sternly than in the others. And so his rebuke is a lot more stern in Mark's gospel than in the others. But Jesus said, look, you need to have faith. Where is your faith? Why do you have no faith? Why are you panicked? Well, they might be, well, hold on a minute. Look, all these waves, we're sinking. What do you mean, why are we panicked? But that's the whole point. God's call on our life is to bring us up to a higher level of thinking. You see, it's perfectly normal, understandable, and reasonable that the disciples would be panicking in the midst of a storm. That's understandable. But Jesus is like, I don't want you on that level. If I say we're going to the other side, that's where we're going. It's like Abraham when God told him to offer up Isaac. Now, this was an interesting thing, because God had promised Abraham that it's through Isaac that the promise will be fulfilled. And now God tells him to offer up Isaac as a burnt offering. And so what does the book of Hebrews tell us? It tells us that Abraham believed that if necessary, God would resurrect Isaac after he offered him up. That's the level of faith he had. And that's how we need to be in the storm. In other words, the disciples should have been thinking, you know what? Even if we sink, God is going to raise us up, because Jesus said we're going to the other side, therefore we're going to the other side. In the face of the storm, we refuse to doubt that God will get us to where he wants us to be. We know that in all things, God works for our good. And that can be difficult at times, because we are humans, we have emotions. Everyone say emotions. But what we want is his emotions. All right? We want God's emotions. We want to feel as he feels about the situation, because his feelings are far more reliable than ours. But let me summarize this message, and it's a very simple summary. God is the source of our strength. We must learn from our mistakes instead of repeating them. God is a restorer, and he uses us despite our failings. God knows what he is doing, even when we don't. Amen.